Well, hi everyone. My name is Ari Middleman. I'm the founder and publisher of Balkan Insider, and we are very glad to be joined by Meto Koloski of the United Macedonian Diaspora. This is a series that we launched in these unique times when we're all getting to know each other virtually. I'd love to be raising a glass of something with you, Meto, but we're doing this instead. And this is the third in a series. The first was with our friends from the Serbian American community, the next with our friends from the Croatian American community, and we'll be having shortly our friends from the Bosnian American community. And then we'd love to hear from everyone. We have about a dozen people on the line now, and we anticipate that'll grow. And previous ones have had as much as 50 and 60 participants. But we'd love to hear from everyone feedback and get a sense of what type of programming they're looking for as we approach the second month of this pandemic. I'm going to turn it over to Meto. I'm quite curious, Meto, if you can maybe just introduce yourself, share some background of your organization. I'll just say by way of background, every time Balkan Insider engages Macedonia Diaspora and Meto, the Twitter blows up. You are well known from Bulgarian MEPs to friends in Greece. And I'd love for folks just to hear a little bit of your background and the organization's background, and we'll go from there.
Great. Thank you so much, Ari. It's really a pleasure to be with you today and at Balkan Insider. And I wish we were cheersing to some rakia under better circumstances, but I hope you, your family, and everybody attending are staying safe and healthy. First of all, I want to give a kudos to you and Ryan and Balkan Insider for all the fantastic work you're doing. I remember when you were starting off and where it's come from then to now. I mean, it's truly an accomplishment. I read it religiously every morning when I wake up. I think it's the first newsletter that I read, and then after that is Politico. So you can see that clearly the Balkan Insider is a lot more interesting, and it keeps us informed. So those of you that are not subscribed, I encourage you to subscribe to Balkan Insider. A little bit about myself and the
Meto, I just want to say that's very kind. Balkan Insider remains a hobby. We don't have a budget, so I didn't pay you to say that. But coming up on 2 years ago, I just found it incredible. We all get morning newsletters, whether folks in Brussels or in the region, in London, in Washington, in New York, and there was just no morning newsletter that's taking good, hard, honest reporting and putting it in a very easy to read format. So we'd welcome anyone who isn't signed up to sign up. It's incredible that almost weekly, if not daily, the list grows and grows, and compliments of many of you on this discussion right now. We have just crossed the 1,000 follower mark on Twitter, so we're very grateful of that. We do all of this without any advertising or promotion. It's all organic. But Meto, sorry to cut you off. Why don't you tell us a little more about UMD and your background?
Thank you, and congrats on the 1,000 mark. I certainly remember when UMD was making that, crossing that mark, so it's definitely an achievement. So myself and UMD1, I was born and raised in the United States in good old Garfield, New Jersey. Went to school in New York in Manhattanville College. Both my parents are of Macedonian heritage. Came here in the 70s, fleeing then communist Yugoslavia for better economic opportunities in the United States. And so I'm really fortunate to have been raised and educated here. And, later on in college, and believe it or not, I was about 19, and I was recalling this earlier this morning because I was on a call with our Australian team, and there was a couple of people that are 19 on that call, and I felt like I was the oldest one there. But I remember when I was 19, I was the youngest one in the room when we were starting UMD. And actually, we had a meeting at the State Department discussing, at that time, the US was planning on building its embassy on top of Kale Fortress area in Macedonia and Skopje. And so we were there to discuss why, how, what can we do to prevent that, and to make sure that there's enough archaeological excavations going on. And so at that meeting, we also pushed for Macedonia to be recognized as Macedonia and not the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Try saying that, 3 times in a row. And a week later, I'm back in New York and college campus in the library, and all of a sudden I hear this news. We get recognized by then Secretary Colin Powell, President George Bush, as Republic of Macedonia. And that was sort of like the impetus to get UMD to a level where we needed to be. At the time, we were just a Macedonian Association of Students and Young Professionals. It grew into the United Macedonian Diaspora, and we named the organization basically our mission, which is to unite the Macedonian diaspora. Since then, we've grown into operations not only in Washington, but also in Canada, throughout the United States, Australia, and most recently, a lot more in Europe. And so UMD is truly becoming a global organization, representative body. And so our top issues are related to Macedonia's right to self-determination, human rights of Macedonians in neighboring countries of the Balkans, as well as religious freedom issues, and NATO EU enlargement, cultural affairs, promotion. This Saturday, I'm attending an online virtual event with Ambar, which is a restaurant in DC, and in Stobi Winery about Macedonian wine. And so we want to help promote Macedonian products, businesses, and whatnot in the United States, other places. We have a very strong youth leadership program called Generation M, which has a BTOP scholarship program that has given close to about, I want to say about 50 scholarships to date, close to about $100,000. We have brought about 30 or so students to Macedonia on a Birthright Macedonia program, which is kind of like taking Birthright Israel, Birthright Armenia, and many other birthrights together. A strong internship program in DC, and I know a couple of my interns are here today, and I also want to shout out to them and thank them for all the work that they do, because more or less UMD operates on a fully volunteer basis besides our office in Washington. Another thing that I want to stress here is that UMD has been thinking of ways of how to improve the brain drain situation in Macedonia, convert that into brain gain. We have started a Macedonia startup kind of providing know-how to entrepreneurs, startups in Macedonia, linking them with investors abroad to try to create more jobs in the region. And so I'm sure we're going to get into the nitty-gritties, but those are kind of like the top issues that we're focused on currently.
That's great. I really appreciate that overview, and really incredible. I mean, in such a short period of time, relatively speaking, to grow from Australia to Canada and points in between. And yes, I do look forward to raising that glass at some point here in Washington, face to face. I'd be real curious, it's just coincidental that this was planned today. Your thoughts on the virtual meeting that happened regarding EU enlargement, and certainly there's a lot on the line for you and your colleagues, and there's even MEPs, European parliamentarians from Bulgaria, who are attacking you by name, Meto. And certainly Balkan Insider doesn't have an opinion or perspective on that, but it's newsworthy, and would be curious your thoughts as North Macedonia begins its move to join the EU.
Well, first of all, let me comment by saying that, it's kind of like not the first time that we've been attacked by some officials from Bulgaria or from Greece or other parts because of making sure that our voice is represented in Washington, and we've definitely butt heads in numerous fora at different events throughout Washington, in Brussels, and other places. So I'm not surprised that the Bulgarian member of European Parliament, Andrei Kovachev, decided to go after UMD yesterday, and not only go after UMD, but go after a 25-year-old member of our organization, Mario Christovsky, who actually had a discussion last week on Wikipedia. And interestingly enough, every time you go to Wikipedia, there's never the Macedonian viewpoint on Wikipedia. It's always what others think of the Macedonians in Macedonia. And so there's a constant war battle, I guess, the new front lines for Macedonia. And so Mario had shed some light, and one of the top people involved in constantly editing is somebody located in Bulgaria. And so the member of the European Parliament attacked us on that, saying that it's sheer propaganda and whatnot. Let me tell you that, and basically he called us anti-Bulgarian. And so, my response to that, UMD's response to that is, first of all, we're not xenophobic, we're not racist. And the other thing is, we're not anti-Bulgarian. What we are is anti-Bulgarian government policy of historical revisionism, and basically usurping parts of Macedonian history as their own, and then pushing Macedonia to change its own textbooks and linguistic modifications and whatnot to appease the Bulgarian government in order to lift their sort of hold on Macedonia's EU progress. And over the weekend, the foreign minister of Bulgaria, and it's very interesting and quite timely that this is happening right now. First of all, on Tuesday, it was the 75th anniversary of the adoption of the Macedonian alphabet and Macedonian Language Day. Yesterday was the EU Zagreb summit, and it's unfortunate that this whole summit was happening under, COVID-19 online. And so, you couldn't get what we needed out of this whole entire summit, and I'll shed some light into that. But what I want to point out here is that why is the foreign minister of Bulgaria getting involved in matters of history and linguistics when she attacked Macedonia and said Macedonian language is a Western Bulgarian dialect combining Serbian words to create their own made-up language? I leave it to historical scholars, linguistic scholars at different universities around the world, and the language is an officially recognized language, not only in the world, at the United Nations and many fora, but what Bulgaria is doing right now is they're basically saying, well, you changed your name with the Prespa agreement to get into NATO, why don't you now change your language and your history to get into the EU? And you and I already know, being in Washington for such a long time, I've been here about 16 years, nothing is fair in politics. There's a saying, if you're not on the table, you're on the menu. However, there is a point where, somebody needs to stand up and say, stop with this, 19th century kind of nationalist policies. And in regard to the summit, one thing another thing that I want to point out is Macedonia has been on kind of waiting table 2004. And so, since then, Macedonia has been blocked from EU one way or another by Greece or Bulgaria. And what they decided to do is, let's block Macedonia from the date for accession talks. Well, in March, the EU came with a solution that they will start accession talks with Macedonia. However, the Zagreb summit was supposed to be the date, or yesterday was supposed to be the day that the EU Council decided on the actual start date and the process. The problem with this is that yesterday they didn't make a decision. They leave room for Bulgaria or other countries to then dictate the terms for opening the actual accession talks. So time will tell. I don't know, but another thing about the summit that we noticed is, this kind of aid package, support package of 3.3 billion euros to the Western Balkans countries, of which 1.7 billion euros are kind of microeconomic financing through EBRD. And those of you that don't know, EBRD is a bank, a European Bank of Reconstruction and development in London, and they will assist with microeconomic financing. The thing is, this crisis has created a question, a major question, and I think for all systems in the world and all of our countries, including in the US, is how prepared is our health care system to handle these types of problems. So that's one aspect that Macedonia and the Balkan countries really need to look at. And another thing is that we need to stop these kind of handouts. I have a friend who's on our advisory council, Elizabeth Melmovsky, and I just heard it this morning on another talk with an investor out of Florida, kind of advising companies in Macedonia. Cash is king. And so constant loans and aid is making these countries and these people dependent on these kind of overarching bodies like the EU and others for constant aid. Yes, it's great probably right now, but long term it's not sustainable, and that's
Meto,
why we have.
This is a lot to unpackage, and I really appreciate it. And this is, I think, the caliber definitely of what folks expect. And it's why we have such a growing readership with Balkan Insider to get this level of sophistication. I am cognizant, that we have about half an hour. I would encourage folks that have questions to do the raise hands, and you'll be unmuted and featured. I wanted to two of your points. You spoke about the brain drain and brain gain, and I certainly did not know about the Wikipedia elements that you just shared, and the manipulation of that apparently coming from Bulgaria. And then you also talked about debt and being beholden to others, which is certainly across the region and increasingly across the world. So why don't we start with the first point? CNN, as we're about 175 days out from the American election, CNN did a profile. I'm not sure if folks remember, and I know we have people who are non-American citizens, American voters, but there's a small town which used to be the porcelain capital of Yugoslavia. They made the finest porcelain all over Europe and employed thousands of people. And now CNN has called it the fake news capital of the world. So very entrepreneurial, where there clearly isn't a brain drain, young folks doing perfectly legal but questionable activities. And I'm wondering, as we're about 175 days out, if you could share some thoughts on that. Because I think for a lot of people, for average Americans, it was the first time, frankly, that they had heard of Macedonia. And it might have even been the first time in history that a presidential candidate mentioned when Hillary Clinton called it out by name. So I'm not saying this to point fingers, but curious your thoughts on this cottage industry that's popped up in Velish.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's very important to note that, Macedonians didn't tank the US elections, whether last time or in the future or whatnot. And that accusation that Macedonia is one of the top, or one of the reasons why Hillary Clinton lost. I mean, I spoke about this at Fox News, actually. Tucker Carlson invited me to speak about this in 2017, which I was surprised about. And these students in Veles, and I've been in Veles, and I was just in Veles actually doing a wine tour last July. And this is a small town that, you said it, it was a porcelain town. That when that was done, all the factories closed up with Yugoslavia disintegrating in 91, a lot of these people, left Veles, but those that were left, is they figured, how do they capitalize? And these students that are like 16, 17, 18 have an outlet through Google, Apple, and whatnot, and Facebook, and they're creating whatever content from whoever is supplying that, whoever is their I guess their boss of why they're doing this, but they're making anywhere between 2,000 and 8,000 euros a month. And so
my understanding is it's something like 400 euro or 450 euro a month is the average Macedonian salary.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
And so,
I'm not casting judgment. I think if anything, it's quite entrepreneurial, and the discussion should be had in the halls of Congress and in Silicon Valley with
you know,
AdWords and manipulating them. But it is fascinating that in this small town, the ripple effects that have come from it.
well, this is why I think, it's funny because I had this conversation 4 years ago, and now I'm having it again with you and reading this article. And Morgan Freeman already apparently did a documentary called "Selling Lies." I haven't seen it yet, but the thing is, we have to know is one. I think it's very impressive the fact that these young students can be. I mean, I'm not very computer savvy or tech savvy, but Macedonia has a growing industry in the IT sector. This is where perhaps the USAID, perhaps, or the Department of Commerce can get involved in teaming up, IT, Silicon Valley companies in the United States with companies and entrepreneurs in Macedonia. There's a vibrant startup community called Startup Macedonia, and they could team them up, create more jobs so that they don't rely on doing fake news or whatnot, and giving them the types of salaries that they don't leave the country, but they're producing and they're giving back to society. And I've always, with discussions with Macedonian embassy officials and government officials, I always said Macedonia is kind of like the Silicon Valley of Southeast Europe. I'm sure other countries in the Balkans could say the same, but the salary amongst the IT professionals in Macedonia is about 2,000 euros a month versus the average, what you said was 400.
So I want to jump into the other point, and I would encourage folks if they have questions to certainly alert me as the host. It seems like ancient history, the first week of October, with everything that's happened over the last 60 days. But Secretary Pompeo made a historic trip over there, and shortly thereafter, finally the U.S. Senate voted, and now we have the 30th member of NATO. Would love to hear your thoughts on that visit, and in particular, I raise it because you were the one who brought up debt and his messaging, which I think rings true as we have this term mass diplomacy, which has entered the lexicon. And we're seeing just another trend. And I'm not casting judgment. Every country needs to make its own bilateral relations, but there has been extensive Chinese activity across the region over the last decade, and then certainly across the region in the last 100 days. And Secretary Pompeo spoke to this. So kind of switching now more into the geopolitics and security space.
Well, I think it's a constructive criticism on our own diplomatic service here. That was the first visit of a Secretary of State to Macedonia in nearly 20 years. That is a very negative message to send to a country that is the crossroads in the region. I mean, the Romans built the Via Egnatia road for a reason, because it was a prime trading route. And so the Chinese historically have used that route, right? And so when the United States companies and entrepreneurs are not involved, it leaves, or EU or European countries like Germany or others. I mean, Germany is the top investor or trade partner, but for example, like Russia is not even on the top 10. The US is not in the top 10, but China is. And China definitely is getting involved a lot more, particularly in the infrastructure projects. And this is why I think these types of visits are very important, but they need to happen more frequently. And they also have to be combined. I mean, you and I were talking about this around that time. They have to be combined with an economic benefit, an element of economic development, because I think U.S. policy has always been, peace, security through economic development. It's sort of kind of like fallen off the radar recently, and we're worried about, Russian influence, Chinese investments, things like that. But I think we need to start putting kind of the money where our mouth is, and push for greater economic ties. I remember you were Ryan was talking with Steve and talking about the double taxation, treaty and things like that. Those are areas we need to work on. The U.S. State Department with the Commerce, the Treasury, all have to work on engaging more the region, particularly Macedonia and the other countries in the region.
We did allude to this with the two previous discussions, and I don't think it's coincidental that over in Podgorica in Montenegro, there's an ambassador who comes from the commercial service. I believe the first female and one of the first 5, if not 10, ever in U.S. history to come from the commercial service. And then in Zagreb, Croatia, someone from a real estate background, a political appointee. And then similarly in Ljubljana in Slovenia, a political appointee from a business background. So I would be curious to what extent, if at all, does UMD coordinate, maybe coordinate is too strong a word, that has legal ramifications in the American legal system, but interact with the U.S. Embassy in Skopje?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to preface by saying that UMD is a non-governmental organization, nonprofit organization, apolitical. We don't take sides, nor do we endorse candidates. In terms of the U.S. Embassy, I mean, UMD has always had a relationship with diplomatic corps in Macedonia, in Washington, in Ottawa, in Canberra, in Brussels, and other places. I mean, I've been to Brussels probably about the same amount of time I've been to Ottawa, in pushing Macedonian kind of interests in terms of the diaspora viewpoint, not the state. And so we actually hosted the current ambassador, who actually is a career service, was based in Athens. Before that, she was based at the OSCE, Kate Burns, and we hosted a dinner in June, right before she left for Macedonia. And what was fascinating about the discussion is that the majority of the 30 or so people that attended the dinner were business leaders from the United States that are investing in Macedonia, and they want to make sure that Macedonian American businesses are protected within Macedonia, do not face racketeering and government buyouts and things like that. And she was very helpful. We have engaged with the U.S. Embassy on our birthright program. Actually, the U.S. ambassadors have attended almost all of our closing ceremonies of birthright, just like the French, the Italian, and other ambassadors in Macedonia. And so the relationship is, I think, a matter of making sure that we have an open door policy. We're not going to agree on everything. We don't agree, particularly on the name change. However, there are aspects of Macedonian society, like environmental kind of protecting Macedonian American business interests, and things like that, that we find common ground.
I want to once again, if there are any questions, feel free to raise your hand. You'll be featured. I appreciate that people, we have over 24 people that are taking time out of their lunch hour or at the end of the workday in Europe joining us. And this will also be recorded. It'll be put up on social media, so please share widely. Just another plug, completely organically, in less than 2 years, Balkan Insider just this week grew to 1,000 Twitter followers. And once again, this is entirely done as a volunteer operation here out of Washington. Speaking of the Macedonian economy and North American investors, and this is maybe out of left field, but Macedonia has made a name for itself in the medical cannabis space. And that's certainly one of the fastest growing industries and unique economic sectors here in the United States. There's been major policy changes in Canada over the last year. My wife and I are heavily invested in this in Maryland. So I'd be curious, once again, out of left field, and Meto, you might not be an expert, but it is a new sector that is employing a growing number of folks over there. Would love your perspective on that.
Well, Ari, thank you. And before that, I failed to answer just the NATO bit. I definitely think that
There you go, Balkan
things,
Insider. We go from medical cannabis to NATO and back again.
I think medical cannabis is a very interesting topic, and the New York Times covered it recently in Macedonia. But before that, I just want to thank you and Balkan Insider for publishing an article that I did on Macedonia's NATO membership, and the participants, if they haven't seen it, they could read it on Balkan Insider. And I'm not going to get into the nitty gritties, but definitely being on the table with United States, Canada, Greece, Bulgaria, and others is a benefit to Macedonia and Macedonians if they can make sure that they seize the opportunity. Yes, we disagree with the name change as UMD policy, but I definitely want to see an opportunity. I'm going to try to see an opportunity. We're going to work to see an opportunity out of this. Long term, we'll see where the future goes. In terms of the medical cannabis, one thing is, I was watching, it's funny, somebody recommended that I watch on Amazon Prime this show, I believe it's called Black Sun, Senkin Balkanum, and it's a Serbian production. Subtitles, you could all look at it. And Macedonia apparently was known as the center of opium production and trade back in the 10s and the 20s and the 30s. And apparently the opium had better quality than the opium in Afghanistan. Macedonians have been growing marijuana for quite some time. I've heard it over the years in the Strumica region, in other parts. I mean, Macedonia has 275 days of sun a year, and so it's prime fertile ground for much agricultural products. The only thing that I want to say here is that while medical cannabis industry is very important, and I think Macedonia can play a bigger role, I hope that government officials in Macedonia, and there's a discussion or articles that are coming out that the former Prime Minister Zoran Zaev and his family own probably a good deal of the contracts on medical cannabis in Macedonia. And I hope that that was not I guess those contracts were not earned while he was in power as prime minister, because that would obviously be a serious breach of corruption and all that. So I hope that if they do legalize it nationally, I hope that it's done amongst kind of, a very regulatory way, because having people like, this marijuana Mike or whatever his name was going to Macedonia and, talking about recreational uses and kind of making a mockery of Macedonian, economy, it's definitely for medicinal purposes or recreational, but there has to be regulations, just like there are in the United States and Canada and other places, right? So.
Yeah, I don't want to dwell on this, but it does seem similar, here in the United States, in theory, well, it's not 50, but it's about 35 or 40 very different programs. And Colorado on the West Coast was first, and then states like Pennsylvania and Maryland here on the East Coast have learned from those mistakes. Croatia's put their toe in the water. It was a large bipartisan vote in the Sabor in their parliament. But they've learned, I think, a lot as Macedonia is still, as you said, kind of ironing out the wrinkles of the regulatory scheme. But this could very well be a great source of investment, foreign direct investment, with the expertise that's been cultivated, no pun intended, here in North America. I'm not seeing any questions
Sorry,
from.
actually, I'm not sure how to raise my hand. You keep saying that, but I don't know how to let you know that I have a question.
Well,
So
Biljana, you're welcome. So come on down.
I'm just going to kind of unmute myself and take charge if you don't mind.
Alrighty.
So we have talked a little bit about pharmaceuticals. We've talked a little bit about politics, economy, language even. One thing that I'm interested to hear about is another thing that happened in the news recently was our Oscar nomination for our documentary Honeyland. And that's one aspect that we haven't talked about yet, Macedonian culture and kind of where we're going, how we're trying to maybe become maybe not a household name, but certainly a more familiar name in the area of film and other aspects of our culture. So I was wondering if Meto, you could talk a little bit more about any activities that UMD has for sharing Macedonian culture through movies, through music, through events that are organized both in areas where there are Macedonians in the communities abroad, but also maybe some virtual events that you're organizing that help us help represent Macedonian culture and language.
Thank you, Biljana. This was a superb question, and you were too modest. Biljana is the executive director of the Macedonian Language e-learning center and has been focused in the promotion of the Macedonian language for over 20 years. And I'm proud to sit on their board of directors as well. And you know, in regards to Honeyland, first of all, I think this was such a huge accomplishment for Macedonian cinematography. Macedonia has over 100 years of filmmaking history with the Manaki brothers out of Bitola. And if you haven't been to Bitola, any of the participants, please definitely visit. The Macedonian filmmaking culture has been quite successful, and it's the second time a Macedonian film has been nominated for Best Foreign Film. It was the first time it was nominated for a documentary. It's unfortunate it did not win either category, and definitely other countries in the world have better financial, I guess, lobby funds that they can use, you know, on the Oscars. But I definitely think it opened a lot of doors for future filmmakers in Macedonia and the film industry. I believe that the directors and the producers of Honeyland are definitely going to go places. I think that they opened an amazing Pandora. Well, I don't want to call it Pandora's, but they definitely opened the box that kind of the environment, the agricultural products, the honey, the deliciousness of this honey. But in terms of UMD and what we've been doing, there's a lot of firsts, believe it or not. And one of the major accomplishments of UMD was to work with somebody from the New York kind of ethnomusicology. And some of you have probably heard of Margaret Mead, who used to be the director of the National Endowment for the Arts, who sponsored this gentleman, Martin Koenig, to go to Macedonia while it was Yugoslavia back in the 50s to do these recordings of Macedonian old school music. And we teamed up with him, NEA, and the Smithsonian Folkways recording, and published the first ever Music of Macedonia CD in the catalog of the Smithsonian, and Macedonian music is out there. We have sponsored the Macedonian Film Festival in Toronto, been a donor of that. We have hosted, like last year, I think we had about 21 movie screenings of Macedonian films, like Secret Ingredient, which was about, you know, medical cannabis and marijuana, believe it or not, Ari, and highly recommended. And actually, sorry, I want to say Balkan Insider was our media sponsor for the premiere of that movie. This year, we were hoping to bring another movie, but unfortunately, you know, this year with coronavirus, COVID-19, we're unable to host these events, but we have gone virtual. We are doing educational discussions. Hopefully very soon with you, Biljana, we're gonna do these Macedonian language classes for children. You know, it's very important. I mean, Macedonia's culture and the culture of any society is our best ambassador, and Washington and other parts of the world are such a great fertile ground for promoting Macedonian culture. And there's a love. I mean, our Macedonian masquerade that we've been holding for the last 16 years is probably our most popular event. I mean, people come from all over the US, Canada, Europe to attend these annual functions. And we combine, you know, kind of 14th, 15th century kind of traditions with current day, with ancient, and bring Macedonian food and culture together. And that's why we did our wine tour last year. We are going to be doing cultural tours of Macedonia this year. And so we're just waiting for some of these restrictions to lift and know that it's safe and sound to visit. But definitely, you know, culture is one of our best ambassadors to promote, our people and our language and our history.
And Meto, to that point, my final question, or maybe more, it's just a statement. It should not be lost. We should all remember this is the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II and the liberation of the concentration camps. And in Skopje, I have yet to visit, but I'm told that it's one of the premier Holocaust museums in the world, really an award-winning. And I'm not sure if you visited that, but so much can be learned through quality museum exhibits. So if you want to speak to that, just as we're wrapping up here.
Yeah, no, Ari, thank you very much for mentioning this. And it's a very tragic story. In March 11th of 1943, at the time, Bulgaria occupied Macedonia, and they had a relationship with Nazi Germany. And while they saved the Bulgarian Jews, what they did is they actually sent 98% of Macedonia's Jewish population to Treblinka. And that museum is dedicated to the 98% of Macedonia's population, Jewish population that was exterminated. And the community is very small. There's probably about 200 people. Unfortunately, Bulgaria has yet to apologize. I was at the museum for the opening in 2011. It is one of the 4 top museums in the world. But another thing that I want to mention here about the museum is not only is it a museum dedicated to the Holocaust and education of the Holocaust, so that never again, right, never forget. But the other thing is it also is a living memorial of Jewish history in Macedonia and the Balkans since ancient times, not just under the Ottomans, right? And so, in Stobi, which is the winery that we visited last year, there is one of the oldest synagogues in Europe. And so you could go to the Stobi Roman ruins and see this synagogue, and how Jewish culture was at the time and religion. And so, I really encourage people that have not been to visit Macedonia, to visit many of these sites. I think that, it's very important. Many people don't know about this part of the world, don't know a lot about the history. And I hope that one day we will see, Macedonia and the Balkan region a socioeconomic, stable region, and a region that's growing, where brain drain and, is not brain drain, but brain gain. And this is where the role of the diaspora plays. I see my colleague Ayla, and I see Steve, and I'm not sure if Alex is on from the Serbian community, but, I think it's so important that all of us and the countries that we come from use us to their benefit to improve the countries where they live, because that brain drain, imagine, Macedonia has lost 850,000 people in just the last 15 years. Can you imagine what done with all those people long term by investing and providing more and turning not those remittances? I mean, remittances are fantastic, but how do you turn remittances into investments into the society and the entrepreneur and spirit, and then also not focus on just the capitals, but focus in other places like Veles, so that they don't be the fake news capital of the world. And we're not known as that, but we're known as a growing society that's making an impact in the region and for the world.
Meto, very, very well said. I really appreciate your time. Appreciate the 24 people who joined us. And look, number one, first and foremost, when this pandemic's over, I'm looking forward to getting a haircut. Number two, I'm looking forward to getting over, as you said, to Bitola, to Veles, checking out the lake for the first time in my life. So putting that on the list. But since that's going to be a while from now, what I'm also looking forward to is our conversation with Ayla Delkic from the Bosnian American community next week. I encourage everyone to sign up for that. Look forward to an equally robust and sophisticated discussion. And if you haven't, as Meto said, if you haven't visited BalkanInsider.com, please sign up. It's a free morning newsletter that synthesizes factual, unbiased information from each of the capitals with a focus on politics and policy and certainly business trends. Once again, Meto, really appreciate your time. Appreciate you sending in that column. We welcome anyone who has an opinion and wants to put together a column. We'd love to talk to you as well. So thank you, and I hope everyone stays safe and stays healthy.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.